A quick PowerPoint on the perspectives of culture and research. Challenges to cross-cultural research include things such as bias, language, and understanding. A logical, unbiased perspective is one in which research design and methods should be based on what is found instead of what is looked for. Bias includes the historical perspective of a cultural hierarchy, the stance that one culture or group is superior to another, and thus if the inferior group does not fit the superior group's ideals, they are subsequently pathologized. Bias has been expressed in sweeping generalizations about various cultures, and in research, these bias can take on three main types: construct, method, and administration. Construct bias in research points to the notion that there is a correct or right way to write items on a questionnaire, and they have similar meanings across groups. A solution is for researchers to recognize and state theoretical underpinnings at the outset, so comparisons across and between cultures can be addressed or at least acknowledged. Method bias also assumes equal understanding and perceptions among various cultures. For example, there can be two groups of students from different cultures, all of the same age, testing their cognitive skills with one group showing lower verbal comprehension of material. An assumption is that the group is less intelligent until they are tested on their reading comprehension, which may show higher scores. If a second or third or fourth method is not used, the scores will not reflect the whole picture. Finally, administration bias. This can be as simple as how the researcher methods or procedures are communicated. Language barriers and cultural background differences between interviewer and interviewee may skew results. When variations in meaning of psychological terminology are not addressed, there will be distortions that can create importance where there is none, or lack of attention to items that have significance. Some cultural factors that must be addressed when a researcher is formulating a study. So this is things from design method all the way to the conclusion. An understanding of cultural variations must be included. Taking cultural factors into consideration allow for better interpretation and meaningfulness across cultures and within a study. One way to address cultural factors is through mixed methods research, where quantitative and qualitative design is utilized to create a fuller picture of the topic of study. The use of multiple data collection strategies can help to supplement findings which may reveal bias both of the researcher and in subject self-reports. We are all biased to some degree, so it's not about getting rid of all bias, it's about acknowledging the bias and doing our level best to understand the view and give that perspective of all sides. When taking a cross-cultural perspective in research, it seems important to be as open to multiple methods and designs. Unfortunately, there appears to be bias against certain forms of research, which has perhaps unnecessarily narrowed the scope and vision of research in the field of psychology. The two primary forms of research design are qualitative and quantitative. So qualitative research is a non-numerical design where observation and interpretation are key. Qualitative analysis can be further defined as the non-numerical examination and interpretation of observations in order to discover meaning and patterns of relationships, and is most often used in historical and field research. Qualitative research can be seen or described as inductive, where quantitative analysis and research is deductive. An oversimplified definition is that inductive is questions or information that adds to understanding, and deductive is removing pieces or parts to get to the root of an issue. Quantitative analysis can be defined as the numerical representation and manipulation of observations for the purpose of describing and explaining observed phenomena. Quantitative research is data-driven and tends to be reductionistic. Both have their strengths and weaknesses, although from a certain perspective, hierarchical thinking has placed quantitative research above qualitative research. However, qualitative research has often been disregarded to the point that publication has been limited. They go on to declare that researchers using quantitative methods have taken the position that theirs is the best way to measure and describe reality. In psychological research, both types of research have similar strengths and common flaws in that they are attempting to explain the how and why of human behavior. Regardless of the type of research design, an emic perspective tends to hold equal weight for culture and habits or ways of expressing themselves. With qualitative research coming from a more exploratory standpoint as an attempt to understand a phenomenon, and quantitative research taking the stance of finding differences, all beginning from a hypothesis and building from there. The selection of a research design depends in large part on the research question, the problem, and the purpose of the study. The foundational parts of research begin with a desire to know or understand. However, research bias can get in the way. When a cross-cultural study is designed, aspects of the culture in question must be taken into consideration as much as the cultural background of the researcher. Personal bias can create cognitive errors which may result in inaccurate or unreasonable conclusions based on emotion, old patterns, memory, inattention, or even faulty information processing. How a study is designed, conducted, and assessed can be problematic if controls are not put into place. From cross-checking translations or adaptation of questions in qualitative studies to the interpretation and analysis of results in quantitative studies. A conscientious researcher will allow and even encourage critique along the journey. Researchers conducting cross-cultural studies are obligated to educate themselves about the culture they wish to explore. This education must include not only cultural norms, but also political and social norms and potential roadblocks. Some helpful hints: in order for researchers and their assistants to be prepared for conducting fieldwork and a written guide, this can be used as homework. The logistical roadblocks may cause frustration in the way of delayed permits or washed out vehicles, all of which can hinder getting to research destinations. Some ethical issues can also create a different challenge that could potentially cause harm to research subjects. So some of the ethical issues that researchers may come across can be a trick to navigate due to differences in culture, values, norms, and language, just to name a few. According to the American Psychological Association's Ethical Principles and Code of Conduct, there are 15 items to take into consideration when conducting research. First and foremost, when it comes to ethics in research, is the Institutional Review Board, or IRB. Although some researchers may see an IRB as a hindrance, they are an important hurdle to cross. IRBs are there to maintain a standard to ensure that research is conducted using scientific methods from design to publication. IRBs help to provide a framework for proposals, approval, and protocol for conducting ethical research. Another important consideration when conducting research, whether that be where a researcher is familiar with the community or not, is informed consent. Informed consent is a requirement for all research. Even if a researcher wanted to conduct his work in the United States, he may come into contact with cultural aspects such as language that he's not familiar with. Languaging of an informed consent document could pose a problem. Language is not only about the words that are spoken, but also voice inflection and tone. Sounds are mapped onto meanings in spoken language, with expression being attached to experience. If the subject of a study does not read, then informed consent must be obtained through a translator, which can pose unintended issues or confusion, which could jeopardize a study. The best course of action would be to find a trusted person to either acquire or act as translator. An ethical issue here might be compensation and acknowledgement in the final published article. An overarching issue in research is that of transparency and communication. So many problems can be avoided by being upfront with all aspects of designing and conducting research. The APA gives guidance and has created codes of conduct. It is up to each researcher and their team to work within that framework, both inside the United States, across its borders, and within varying cultures. And here are some references.